It's been 3,710 days since Citizens United was approved. It's been 6,600 days since the beginning of the Iraq War, and we are still there. Passed the House, and it still awaits Senate. It's been 469 days. It's been 88 days since Biden was assassinated, and kids are still in cages.
It's been 200 days since the CDC issued order under Section 361, otherwise known as the Eviction Moratorium. Welcome to Organize This. Hey everyone, post-credits Josh here. Hopefully you won't be seeing too much of me going forward, but while we're here, might as well make the most of it. Just wanted to say thank you to everyone for tuning into the first episode of Organize This. And just a disclaimer, this is our first time doing anything like this. So we're working through the technical kinks. We're working through my awkwardness, which is a huge barrier that I have to overcome. But if you stick around, I promise it only gets better from here. So thank you again, and welcome to Organize This.
No, it just helps to be honest about that.
Right, exactly. So I'll add that, why are we here, right? We're all standing here in this park on a Sunday at 1 p.m. Because we weren't paid to do it, right? If someone wants to, please step forward. We're here because we're inspired, right? Because we believe in the movement, we believe in the working people, and we believe in Joe. That's why we're here. But one day, maybe distant past, maybe recent past, we weren't inspired. We didn't care, not about our neighbors, we didn't care about the movement, and we definitely didn't care about Joe. Right? Someone came along, or something came along, and inspired us. So when you're out there talking to people, you got to show them that what inspired you, because maybe then you can inspire them. And that's the only way we get people to help. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Who's got the power? We got the power. Who's got the power? We got the power. Who's got the power?
We've got the power.
What kind of power?
What are we doing here? I'm just standing on a picnic table, yelling some dumb shit about some dumb thing. Yeah, that wraps it up pretty nicely. But at the end of the day, it's about something more than that. What we're doing here today, and what we're doing here with you, the listener, is we're trying to build power, build community power, build people power with everybody involved. And that's defined by a term called organizing. Obviously, this podcast is called Organize This, so you had to know this was coming. So if you're here for the stories, just skip ahead. But I think it's important for our first episode to talk a little bit about what organizing is. So, what the fuck is organizing, I guess? Well, organizing is a lot of things. It's about building a shared sense of solidarity, orienting everyone around a common goal, and most importantly, it's about giving people a sense of their own power to improve society. Organizing is kind of like what you would call mobilizing. But there's a key difference. Mobilizing is like me sending a text message to someone I know is involved in something and asking them to come to an event for that thing, right? One-time thing. Mobilizing is it's like activism. It's about engaging with people who are already gonna come, right? Like, they're already interested, they're already participating even. And it's just about sort of rallying that participation in something short-term, a one-off. And these one-offs, they could be big, they could be small, but it doesn't matter because they're one-offs. And even though they can be huge, they can be big, They can appear massive even. They don't really sustain like a long-term goal. They don't really achieve something in the end because they don't have the longevity. And the most important thing about mobilizing is that it does not build the capacity of those people involved. It doesn't get them more involved. It calls them in for a moment and then sends them back out. And that's where the difference is. That's where you get organizing. Organizing engages with people who normally wouldn't be involved. These are people who are completely divested. And maybe they're just interested in the theory. Maybe they're just interested in helping somebody, right? Organizing channels that interest and turns it into real, tangible action. And then it builds on that action. It gets them more involved and builds their capacity to get others involved. Organizing is the only sustainable way to grow a long-term movement, to grow long-term change. Organizing shows everyday people that they can have an effect. They can change things that are relevant to their day-to-day lives. They can develop their ability to be an organizer and to be an activist. And it develops their confidence as well. And it helps them, most importantly, to be able to organize someone else. Mobilizing gets people to a place. Organizing builds more organizers. You can't win without organizing. Mobilizing in short-term goals, short-term events, one-offs, that's all well and good. But if there's no place to receive the structure, the support of those events, if there's no place to take someone who showed up and showed interest and build on their interest, you didn't make any progress. And that's where organizing comes in. And that's where being a voice for organizing comes in. And that's what we hope to do here. Myself and my brother, we hope to organize you so that you can organize someone else. Now, are we experts? Well, I'll speak for myself and tell you that absolutely fucking not. I'm not an expert at all. I'm just a guy sitting here at his desk with a microphone. But I think it's about how we use the tools that we have. So we are going to try to use the tools at our disposal, at the time at our disposal, which I will tell you there's not much of. But we're going to use it to have real conversations with real organizers on the ground and show you how you can get involved, how you can help out, how you can get yourself organized and become an organizer. After all, that is, in my opinion, what organizing is all about. And if you learn nothing from this going forward from after these 3 minutes, well, you could just listen for the dumb jokes that we make. I'll probably laugh at them more than you will. So don't feel bad. I'm aware. Thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Joshua Rusinov. I am the Secretary of the North New Jersey Democratic Socialists of America, and this is Organize This.
It's been 226 days since the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention issued order under Section 361, temporary halt in residential evictions, otherwise known as the eviction moratorium. This is Organize This. In September of 2020, the CDC, under the auspices of COVID prevention, issued a public health order directing that certain covered persons may not be evicted from their residential property in any jurisdiction in which the order applies. The order covered the whole of the United States of America and did not apply to jurisdictions that had their own form of eviction moratorium, which was more stringent or protected equal or greater tenant rights. The CDC, in issuing this order, realized what even our fumbling government at the time had to admit, which was that an additional influx of hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of unsheltered individuals and families without health care and without access to housing would be an immense exacerbation of an already raging pandemic. What the CDC, though, did not account for, or what they chose not to account for in issuing this order, was a couple of things. Number one, Homelessness in the U.S. was already at crisis levels before the pandemic hit, and this pandemic in no way protected those that were already on the streets. In fact, we saw this in the summer and fall of 2020 when Southern California and the city of Los Angeles in particular, where homelessness is at absolute human rights impoverished nation levels of crisisness, particularly in the Skid Row district. That was one jurisdiction where the cases of COVID continued to surge, continued to increase throughout the ebbs and flows in other jurisdictions. And this was largely tied in with the homeless population. So this eviction moratorium in no way protected either the public or these individuals as intended. The other critical factor that the CDC missed was that the majority of the housing crisis in America is not exclusive or even predominant to the homeless. Millions of Americans today live in conditions that we would deem as human rights violations if they happened anywhere else in the world, from lack of safe drinking water to uncovered wiring, other electrical dangers, to leaking roofs, to failure to have a safe lock or any other preventative form of secure housing. Tenants in America every day are facing threats to health, safety, liberty, and the ability to live a decent human life. And we're going to get into that. But before we do, threshold, questions that you ask every time opportunity to join something for change arises is, well, where the fuck am I? Who are you? Why are you? What are you? So we're going to answer that question now. Welcome to Organize This. My esteemed, lovely, amazing host, Joshua Rusinoff, can tell you, what you're in for here.
Welcome, everyone, to Organize This. It's a pleasure to have you with us. So what do we got in store for us? Well, we've got a story of tenants fighting a landlord who has held back from them basic services. They have no security in their homes or in their mail delivery. They lack hot water. Their homes are infested with roaches, rats, mice, moths. Their rent is too high, and their landlord has engaged in illegal eviction activity throughout the pandemic. These are the tenants of Ivy Hill in northern New Jersey.
And you and Josh, thank you for the intro. By the way, let me just say at the outset, it's Josh is a comrade in the truest sense. He is well, maybe I don't know, maybe you're better to tell this than I am. Why don't you kind of give us a little bit sort of your background, what got you involved in organizing, and my sort of, I'll be throwing out these little tidbits here and there about experiences of my past as an old man who did some organizing a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Anytime you listen, you always are going to have people come up to you in public corners, in street corners, in public squares, and present to you that they're the new prophet or the new Messiah. But know your comrade. Know where they come from, know who they are, know what brings them here. So, Mr. Rusinoff, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself in that regard?
Awesome. Well, hey everyone, I'm Josh Rusinoff, and I'm the secretary of the North New Jersey Democratic Socialists of America here in northern New Jersey. I guess I got into it my whole life, right? I've always believed that, people deserve a roof over their head. They deserve to live the life they want to live. And in 2016, a man ran for office that I'd never seen the likes of before. Bernie Sanders. He ran for the presidency. And it's my own fault. I should have known about him before, but I didn't. And I'd almost given up, hope. But he stood out there, and he fought the power, and he inspired me. And I think that's the thing. We all can care, and we all believe in a movement, a person. But at some point in our lives, we didn't. It could be recently, could have been long ago, but we didn't believe, we didn't care. And someone came along and inspired us. And that's what organizing is. Organizing is taking that inspiration that you were given and giving it back to the community, so hopefully you can inspire someone else. And that's what I was inspired to do with the Democratic Socialists of America. I was organized, I was brought in, and I was shown a movement, a group of people, and an action group that I could believe in, that I could fight with, to build a better world.
Thank you, Josh. Yeah, look, I feel that whoever is tuning in right now, and thank you for tuning in. If I had to guess why you're tuning in, other than as a show of emotional support, it would be because you believe that change is necessary, particularly progressive, people-powered, populist-oriented change that affects economic livelihoods and access to resources and wealth inequality and basic human rights. You see what's going on out there. You see through various forces, probably in your direct life and also in the political and cultural and corporate sort of institutions at large, a minimizing of certain voices, right, and minimizing of opportunities to make change, right? Our elected officials in no way represent anything close to change makers, and those who pretend to do so are clearly lying by virtue of what happens once they're elected to office. So I think you're listening. If you're listening, it's because you say, well, okay, something needs to be done for housing. Something needs to be done for labor, for the environment. And I want to do something, but I don't know how to get involved. I don't know, is there an organization I talk to? Is there a campaign I join? Is there, a political leader I follow? Is there a political program I should listen to? I mean, people are starved. And the truth is, the answer to that question is not, it's not so easy on the one hand, but on the other, it's extremely easy. And that's what we're here to tell you is, organizing is really just finding your place in somewhat of a boring, somewhat of a rote, somewhat of a technocratic game that is really, truly the only way to affect change. And in the context of housing, and maybe in a second, Josh, we can get into what's going on at Ivy Hill. But I think just in talking about organizing and why we organize on housing matters, it's purely a numbers game, right? So, especially in these larger complexes, you have hundreds of tenants versus one landlord. Maybe the landlord is a private equity firm. Maybe it's a company that has a dozen owners. Well, you're still talking 200, 312, right? And oftentimes, these landlords are individuals who are prominent within the community. So they have their reputation on the line. They have other business ventures on the line. Oftentimes, as is the case in Los Angeles, they have their political careers on the line, i.e. LA City Council is basically run by landlords, slumlords in the city of LA. So housing organizing can work because if you get enough people to make noise, it doesn't matter that they don't have the access to the political resources, because they could shut you down. Your tenants are everything. And if they band together, they can make some noise. So with that in mind, Josh, you want to fill us in on what's going on at Ivy Hill?
Yeah, and you're totally right about all that. And everyone needs a roof over their head. Everyone needs housing, right? It's an issue that unifies us all, and that we can all fight for together. Fighting for your neighbor is in fact fighting for yourself. So let's look at what's going on at Ivy Hill in northern New Jersey, in Newark specifically. We got a building that houses, that's 15 apartments per 15 floors times 10 buildings. That's an innumerable amount of people, all suffering under the guise of one landlord. And, they've had so many problems. Over 600 complaints since the beginning of the pandemic about illegal evictions. They've had rodent infestations. I've talked to a guy there that's lived there for 15 years, and he said that rodents and roaches have always been a problem. All 15 years that he's lived there, they've had these problems. There's no hot water. There's no security. People have always complained to me that their packages get stolen, and that's because there's no place to leave them. And everyone I talk to, so many of them are saying to me, I have to leave, like I want to get out of here. But for most people, they don't have that choice, right? It's a cheaper apartment complex. So they got to be there because they can't afford it, especially with what's going on during the pandemic, which just makes it even more disgusting that this landlord would engage in the eviction process during a crisis like the pandemic.
Let me ask you this. What brought to your attention or the DSA's attention, and maybe you can talk a little bit about sort of how the movement for the Ivy Hill tenants originated, and maybe also a little bit about what the goals are, both kind of the long term and the short term.
Sure. So I guess it came on the DSA's radar because it's just generated such noise already within the city. 600 complaints in a year that's so much. That's way too much. And so it came to the Housing Justice Group attention in my chapter. And then just based on that, we went out there, right? We took a day in the middle of winter. It was cold as balls, I'll tell you what. And we went out there and we set up a table. And we went in, right? We went into a building, masks on, of course, and we knocked on every door and we asked people about the issues they had. We asked them, has anyone been doing anything about these? Have they talked to the landlord? They all told us, yes, we have, and they haven't done anything, right? And we got these.
So people were all kind of willing to just tell their stories. Was there, what was the vibe you got from people that, here's someone out here kind of asking us how we feel about this?
It's interesting because, for the most part, I think that people are still, especially with COVID, right? It's incredible that anyone opens their door to talk to us. But for the people that do, everyone had something to tell, right? Everyone had a story. Some people refused to tell it because they were afraid of repercussions, which is totally understandable. And some people, were more than happy to complain to us. We're here to hear their issues. We want to know. And, we collected their numbers and we called them later. We emailed them. We talked to them. We followed up with them, right? And that's something their landlord definitely didn't do. Their landlord wasn't coming out to hear their issues. He didn't even want to hear their issues when they brought it to him, when they volunteered that information. He didn't want to hear it, and he didn't do anything about it. That's for fucking sure.
What is the extent to which what do we know about this landlord? Who is this guy? What's his deal? Can we call him out?
It's a big complex, right? And it's owned by an even bigger landlord in terms of a company, but that doesn't eliminate the personal responsibility of the person who's in charge of managing that building.
So this is a management company that we're talking about rather than the actual owners of the building.
Correct. Yeah.
Well, it's an interesting point, right? Because this is another issue that is prevalent, right? In what I am from now on just going to refer to as the housing crisis in America, which is essentially you have an increasing amount of wealthy institutions, not just individuals, although you do have certain trusts and whatnot. You have them buying up real estate. Oftentimes in a smallish to mid-sized city where they, jack up the rent artificially, cartel style, and they hire these management companies that are buddies of theirs, essentially to contract out anything having to do with maintenance of these, apartment complexes in most cases. Mm-hmm. And what that results in is you have one additional layer, right? One additional barrier between the tenant and the person who is ultimately responsible legally and morally, insert joke there about landlords, for your well-being, for your shelter, right? Right. That is the person who you pay your rent to. And so I think maybe, Josh, one of the things you're getting at is that in Ivy, in particular, but in many places around the country in general, a lot of people don't even know who their landlord is. They don't even know who owns the place where they're living, who can kick them out, and who they've been paying their money to.
Right, and that's totally right. Like you can think you know who your landlord is. They give you a piece of paper with a name on it. That's the person responsible for the building, whatever the position they give them, and that's the person you direct your complaints to and everything like that. But that's not the owner in a lot of cases, right? The owner is this company, and they're putting that barrier there to keep you from finding out because the second a company owns more than one building and both buildings understand who their real landlord is, that changes the numbers game even further. That's not just one building organizing against a landlord. That's two buildings. That entire landlord's property organizing against that landlord. So they don't want you to find out.
Did you Sorry, no, it just reminds me that this game kind of. Did you ever watch that show Parks and Recreation?
I love Parks and Rec.
Do you remember? Do you remember how April scheduled all of Ron's meetings on, I think it was March 31st, but she thought it was like a fake date?
Right.
So basically, that's what these management companies are. They're the go-between. They take your complaints and submit them to a non-existent person in a non-existent meeting on a non-existent date.
Right.
And really, a lot of times what they do is that they'll wait for your complaint to be actionable, right? And what does that mean? That basically means if you're poor and you can't afford a lawyer and you're an immigrant who's, basically at their mercy to be in this country, you're not going to sue them. So fuck you. You really don't have any rights, right? Because they're certainly not going to prison or anything. And then, the other part of that is, but okay, so let me ask you this. So you're talking about basically, you were making the point about how when two complexes, right? Like a lot of people don't know who their landlord is to the point that they don't know how much power they have if you're really talking about kind of one entity. Right. Is that the case here? Did that happen? Were you guys able to sort of connect the various, interests here together?
Totally. And I think a lot of it is that, there is someone responsible for the building after all. So the tenants are unified. Their issues are the same, right? All those issues, they're prevalent through all those buildings, through all of Ivy Hill. They're present to all the tenants. And that's the thing. You can be unified in your struggle without knowing that final boss, that corporation. You don't have to know about them to be united in your struggle. And you present yourself to that corporation as a threat, and then you'll know. Then you'll know for sure who they are, because then they have to take action. So yeah, let me tell you, there was this particular case. Someone, and we're gonna call them Josh because that's my name, so it can't be me. But let's call them Josh, and it's a tenant that I spoke to at Ivy Hill. And this person, they've lived there for maybe 4 or 5 years now, which is longer than most tenants. I mean, I've had a couple who are there for 10, 15 years, but most of them are on 1 2, just moved there. Most people don't stick around long, right? But this guy, he's been there for about 4 or 5 years. He told me this story. It wasn't actually about him. It was about his neighbor that we didn't get to talk to because his neighbor doesn't live there anymore. His neighbor lived there for a long time, a little bit longer than this tenant, than Josh did. And the whole time he lived there, he always complained to him about roaches constantly infesting his house. He told me that one time his neighbor came out of his bedroom to get himself a glass of water in the middle of the night, and a rat climbed out of his toaster just at like 2 a.m.
Jesus.
And all this time they're calling the exterminators, and the exterminators, they come, right? The landlord gets these cheap exterminators. They come in and they spray the place down lightly, or they give them like a couple traps that work for maybe a month, and then everything comes back. And then if tenants want to take care of this in a more timely manner, they have to buy traps and pest control stuff themselves, right? which they shouldn't have to do, and they should take care of the problem at the source, right? There's obviously an underlying problem why these things keep coming back, that the landlord has refused to take care of. But this tenant doesn't live there because even though there's an eviction moratorium during a pandemic where, so many people lost their jobs, so many people are on unemployment, with landlords having a mortgage freeze, there's technically an eviction moratorium. Well, this guy threatened this tenant who was an immigrant, and he threatened him with ICE. He threatened to call ICE and have him deported if he refused to pay his rent during the pandemic. And he paid as long as he could, but there just came a point in time where he couldn't continue, and to avoid the threat, he had to leave. And where this is a cheap building again, right? So if you can't afford to live at Ivy Hill, especially when you're out of a job during the pandemic, I don't know where else you could go. And this landlord who doesn't need this one person's rent, right? Shouldn't need any of them. He's not paying mortgage. They forced this tenant out of a home, out of a roof, over 3 months.
It's
rent.
horrific. Well, and it just exposes, again, the American sort of whatever. It's not limited to I guess America, but systems sort of disregard a certain class of people, right? Like a subclass of people. Basically, if you're an immigrant, all of these protections that we're going to have in place, PPP loans, that doesn't apply to you, right? This is, we become very nationalistic and jingoistic when crisis hits and whatever. But even so, it fails to address the reality again of what housing is. And, the fact that like you said, doesn't compare with a moratorium on mortgage payments, right? And again, it exposes the things that this doesn't do. It does not prohibit rent increases. It does not even defer your rent, or it does not eliminate your rent obligation. Exactly. Meaning that come, June 2021, you have tens of thousands in back rent. Like, how are you going to afford that?
Right.
And moreover, and foreclosure actions. You could still, as a landlord, foreclose, whether it's, I guess a mortgage is the more proper foreclosure. You could still have eviction proceedings in court. You just can't actually kick people out of their homes. So come June 30th, you can have like that. Tens of thousands of people become evicted because actually this process has been going through the courts. Yeah, and again, it's like there's no actual protection there long term, right? It's just a band-aid to what is otherwise kind of a horrific systemic problem. I mean, it's just when you put like a story to it, and realize that that's happening to so many immigrants in the country right now. People are so scared, right, of being found out. And when you have, COVID, outbreaks in other parts of the world, including Latin America, and just happening at the border, people will do anything. And that's ripe for exploitation. And it seems like that's what these landlords are doing.
Exactly. And that's the thing. There's no plan in place. When the eviction moratorium ends, whenever it does end, that's so much money. And if you couldn't pay, $1,000 a month back during the pandemic, there's no way that you're going to pay $10,000 at once when it's over. And what pisses me off even more about that is that these people will say, like, oh, we did something, right? We made this eviction moratorium. You couldn't get kicked out of your house for this amount of time, right? But you didn't put a plan in place to deal with the fallout that comes after that, to deal with all the people who lost their jobs or missed payments because they were out of a job for a certain period of time. People who were living paycheck to paycheck. How the fuck are they supposed to come up with all that background when they haven't even had a job during the pandemic? And, what is it? Like essential workers jobs, they're limited, right? There's only a certain number of them, even if we filled every single one, even if every single one was given decent pay, which they're not.
even if that was the case, there's only so many people that can survive off that. There's certain people that just the system has no room for, or they didn't make room. They could have room, but they didn't make room for them. And landlords, they're not paying mortgages right now. The eviction moratoriums, they're a great band-aid, but at the end of the day, there needs to be something in place. Rent forgiveness, whatever it be, there needs to be something in place to help the people who really need it. Because the eviction moratorium, that does help people, of course. But the people who really need that help will still need that help come the end of the eviction moratorium.
Yeah, I mean, it helps people in that it lets them know their rights, which are actually limited, right? I mean, in New Jersey, where you're organizing this effort, the state eviction moratorium is actually better than the CDC guidance is promulgated. But just knowing that, just hearing those words gives people the sense of, oh, hey, I don't have to be. In fact, it might be illegal, right? And that in and of itself is so empowering. So in that vein, right, talking about what kinds of things have you been doing? That sense of agency, that sense of power, and maybe even on a higher level. Why don't you just give us a little bit overview of what you're doing, who you're doing it with, what the effort is, kind of long-term, short-term goals, all of that stuff.
Yeah. And I'm going to start off quickly by addressing what you just said about the eviction moratorium lets people know their rights. Exactly. And that's the thing. These landlords, they keep that information from people. I can't tell you how many of these tenants I've talked to that did not know there was an eviction moratorium in place, that didn't know that it was illegal for the landlord to evict them, that it's illegal for them to have anyone but a sheriff's office lock them out of their doors, because the landlords will do it, but that's illegal, right? And these tenants, they don't know that because that information is kept from them. And that information, it's crucial to them fighting back. So talking about fighting back, yes. So we're doing it. The Housing Justice Group of the North New Jersey DSA we go out there every other weekend and we canvass a building and we talk to the tenants and we bring the tenants, right? Because it's far more impactful to hear that we can fight back against this together from your neighbor than it is from some people from some organization, right? We get their neighbors that are inspired to come with us, and they come with us and they canvass the buildings. And we talk to the tenants, and then after we talk to them, we invite them to a Zoom call where we sit down and we talk about what's the next step. How do we escalate this, right? We sign a petition. We have an event, a rally in the park, right? We send that petition with however many, 1,000 signatures to the landlord. They still don't act. Well, we take further steps, right? So what are the short-term goals? Well, the short-term goals are to address the immediate problems, right? Immediate problems being illegal evictions, lockouts, immediate problems being the rampant infestations, right? And if they choose to handle these, the landlord, great. And if they don't, which I suspect they won't, then we go further, right? And the short-term goal is just to get these people who live there right now the justice that they deserve. But the long-term goal.
So let's talk about that a little bit more concretely. Right. So you mentioned legal eviction. So there is effectively an eviction going on right now, despite the eviction moratorium. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and it comes back to people not knowing their rights. There are court proceedings that happen still during the COVID pandemic, even though most of them have been blocked, or they do virtual ones, right? And these are not mandatory. You don't have to go to these. They cannot kick you out of your house if you don't go to it. But people don't know that, right? They get a letter from the landlord. They get a letter from the city saying they've been summoned to this, and they go because the landlord sent them another letter that says they have to go, but they don't have to go. It's completely voluntary, but they're tricked, right, into doing this, into going forward with this, and that is totally illegal. Not that the landlord will ever be punished for this, but it is totally illegal, and that goes back to people not knowing their rights, and that's why I'll tell you another immediate goal is that we're trying to tell people their rights. It's part of our Know Your Rights campaign as a whole, and the first thing we give people when we talk to them at the door, so give them a piece of paper that explains all of this, that explains what the eviction moratorium is, who can and who cannot lock you out of your apartment, that you cannot be evicted right now for non-payment of rent, that you do not have to go to these voluntary court proceedings because they are voluntary, and that, there is a date to the moratorium, and that at that end of the date right now, you will have to pay back that rent. And so we invite them to come with us and see how we can fight back against that. So,
so on those court proceedings, so basically, so what you're saying is notices that a court is going to be hearing their essentially their eviction. And interestingly enough, by the way, I don't know if this plays into it, but so the CDC guidance actually doesn't prohibit evictions in totality.
Right.
It only prohibits certain covered persons for failure to pay rent if those people don't have another place to go, essentially. That's
right.
Order reads. So if either you make, a penny over, I think 99,000, right, which in some cities is that high, especially if you're dealing with, a family of four or whatever, or another place you can go and you can't attest under the penalty of perjury of the law that, you'd be homeless basically if you weren't kicked out. And here's the kicker. Be kicked out for the same reasons you could be kicked out before the pandemic, most of which are bullshit, right? For breaking the law, noisy, being a noisy neighbor, right? Whatever shit you signed in your lease, which you agreed not to do, which is probably, by the way, against public policy and is not in the eyes of the law. But again, right. To your point, tenants don't know that. Right. So if you tell a tenant, hey, look at your contract, you said you wouldn't be making noise after 7, I can kick you out. Well, you made noise after 7, get the fuck out of here. Right. And that's not even protected by the CDC guidance, or I'm sure a lot of these state programs. So you're basically saying a lot of these people are still, in their eyes, things are progressing as if there was no eviction moratorium. And so then what happens? Do they show up to court and then there's a ruling against them? Is it that there's a default judgment? Landlord says you got to leave by a certain date. What happens at that point?
So I can't tell you because we've prevented this. Like this is the issues that we've faced with these.
Awesome.
We've actually caught them in the act, right? We've saved the letters. We've seen the letters from the landlords, and we've told these people, like, you do not have to go, right? We have housing attorneys working with us, and we tell them you do not have to go. It's voluntary. That letter that says that you have to go, that's illegal, and we keep that, and we've actually stopped this.
Do you I was just gonna say, do you and sorry if anyone there's a little bit of a delay in our sound here. We're working through the kinks, growing pains. So, but what I was gonna say was, essentially, you said that you have legal aid or some sort of tenants' rights attorneys working with you. Then that the tenants basically get these letters in the mail. They reach out to you, you being DSA, Democratic Socialists of America, which, by the way, I think we should spend just talking about who they are, because it is, for a lot of people, getting into organizing. And I think this has been the case with you, Josh, right? In a sense with me to a lesser extent. Again, I'm an old man. When people, I want to organize. I don't believe in these bullshit political parties. I want to actually work with tenants working for their rights. I want to work with unions working for their rights, or retail workers trying to unionize, or whatever. Like, where do I go? A lot of people start with DSA. But Josh, maybe do you want to talk a little bit about DSA and I guess with the thought of, if you want to organize, if you want to find an organization, there's likely a DSA near you. They will likely be able to channel your time and aggression and passion to a worthy cause. So, know your company. Josh, tell us about the DSA in that sort of context.
Yeah, totally. And I'll, and I'll start with my personal tale into the DSA. Usually, yeah, the usual system, how it works is, let's say I want to join the DSA, which you should. It's great. And the point is you want to do the work, right? The work that it takes to really make people's lives better. And, you know, DSA
And let's even before that, the DSA. Like, what is the DSA? Let's start. Let's assume nobody even knows who they are.
So DSA, Democratic Socialists of America, is a Big Ten organization. What does that mean? Right? It means that it's not dedicated to a specific school of thought or a specific line of thinking. It includes everybody, every line of thinking along a certain, obviously, category of thinkers. But there's it encompasses everybody from, you know, your typical Democratic voter potentially to your Marxist revolutionary basement agitator, right? Uh, and
Fuck yeah, my people.
Exactly. And the DSA sort of brings them all together and sort of puts them in a place where they can, on the one hand, they can discuss their opinions in a in a more respectful and unified way, because the idea is the same, right? All of them are in this organization to make the better world a better place. So with that baseline,
and let's talk a little bit about just ideology, just because it is a vital part of DSA. So what's there? There is an overarching ideology, say DSA, or is there not? Or is it more about, it's obviously left. It's obvious. I mean, socialists. It's in the name, right? More of like a cosmetic marketing sort of big tent, but left policies vibe, or is that in fact a guiding ideology of the?
Oh, socialism is 100% a guiding ideology of the DSA. We believe in the working class. We believe in ownership by the working class in a country made up that works for the working class, right, exclusively, against the rich and the elite. That the average everyday human being should be in charge, and they should have the decision-making power in society to make the changes that they need to make their lives better, because they are the ones that produce the gains from capital. It's their labor surplus that becomes corporate profits, and we are dedicated to taking that labor surplus and giving it back to the workers. And that is the overarching ideology.
Beautiful.
What changes in DSA, right, is the approach to solving the problems, or sometimes even the problems, right? Certain problems are not considered problems by other people, but mostly it's the approach. What is the strategy? Do we focus entirely on the labor battle, on organizing in the streets? Do we focus entirely on doing sit-ins in apartment buildings? Do we focus entirely on electoral politics, electing socialists into federal or city offices, right? And these things are decided every 2 years at the DSA convention, actually, which is coming up this August. We elect an NPC, a National Political Committee, which doesn't guide the organization. Sorry, it's the logistical decision-making body. And then what happens at convention is we also vote on resolutions, and those resolutions determine the DSA's priority, and that priority is then enforced by the NPC, the National Political Committee. They choose how the money that's collected through dues, through donations, where that money goes to best support the priorities that the DSA has deemed important. The NPC does not get to choose the direction of the organization. That's the voters, that's the delegates that go to convention and vote on these resolutions. They choose the direction. The NPC decides how they will enforce it.
And that's when you talk about the voters, you're saying just regular people who sign up for the DSA, right? So, again, this whole thing trying to be a very practical guide for people interested in organizing to try and get involved. Right. And just to get your ass in a very I say that with all love, because I am certainly not out there every day, not near Josh, and we could all do more. But to the extent that inertia is an obstacle, and just the one answer, the one question is, well, how do I start? Maybe we can help guide that. And I think our first sort of tip here is find a local DSA. Find a local DSA, and maybe, Josh, maybe honing in on your story, like, what was the first thing you did? Like, did you sign up online? Did you go to a meeting? Who was give us your sort of meet cute with the DSA, because I think it might inspire other people who may not I mean, who are completely new to organizing, may not even be very social in general. Year in quarantine hell, like what was it like joining the DSA? Give us your story, and maybe that can inspire others to do the same.
And let me just say, I did not start in the DSA in college when I was still like in the educational system, but you can. There is a youth DSA, and if you're in college, I would suggest looking up your local youth DSA. And here's the beauty of it: if you go to a university that doesn't have a youth DSA, start one. You can get in contact with your local DSA chapter, and they'll help you start one for your university. That's all I'll say about that. But let me tell you, I got into DSA, right? Normally what happens is you live in an area, say North New Jersey, you go to the DSA website and you find your chapter, which you can do by your location, and you email someone in that chapter, and they'll invite you to an orientation meeting, and you'll have your orientation. You get invited to the Slack, which is the app that the DSA uses. You're invited to some group chats for working groups you're interested in, and then from there, it's the world is your oyster, right? You can choose what you want to get involved in. You can choose to stay out of certain other things. There's general chapter meetings, everything like that. My path was not like that because I'm a little bit gung ho and I'm a little bit eager. So I go on the DSA's website, which you can sign up online totally, and I go to the DSA's website. Just Google them, basically. I'd always been a fan, but again, I didn't have time to join when I was in college. Fanboy, exactly. I didn't have the flag. I didn't have the flag till I joined. But
did you have like the favorite, like the hunks of DSA magazine?
You know what?
Did you put up like the Tiger Bee posters? It actually predates you. But anyway, continue.
No. That's didn't have any DSA posters. I actually still don't have any DSA posters, which is sad. But in any case, I go on one day. I go on the website, right, and I see they're advertising some of their national committees. I see National Electoral. I see the International Committee. I see Eco-Socialism, and I see the Medicare for All Committee. And I just assumed, right? I didn't even know chapters were a thing. I just assumed those 4 committees were DSA. Like those are the 4 things that DSA does, right? So I opened up the links for each of those national committees, and I applied to all of them. There were the Eco-Socialism Committee let me on, so I became a part of National Eco-Socialism, and National Electoral let me on. And I started doing work, right? I met my district supervisor, who I will not name to protect him, just in case. But he immediately invited me to the Slack, and it was right before election season. I joined in late September, early October. So we were right in the thick of it, and there was a whole slate of DSA endorsed candidates. A couple of them I worked on campaign profiles. I did some research. I did some text banking. So, for instance, Marquita Branshaw in Tennessee, who did not end up winning. I did a whole series of text banking for her among DSA members. So I started doing work there, right? And about a month in, maybe, after the election, right? November ended, and I get a message. I get an email from somebody from North New Jersey DSA, and they're like, it says here, they're like, we see on the National Registry that you're a member of National DSA, and you live in North New Jersey, but you're not in the chapter. And I was like, what's a chapter? So they sent me an email, went to a new member orientation, met the key people who were the first to like really inspire me actually in the work of the DSA. But they were, union people. They were organizers. They organized me. They inspired me. They made me, I'd always believed and cared, but they showed me the value in their movement and in their work. And so I lent my effort to it.
Right on.
And it was great. I got involved with, I got to say, like, I pretty much just joined every group I could because I didn't realize how that worked. But, and there were some groups like I just didn't have time for. And, in the world of Zoom, it's all different. And so yeah.
Well, yeah, it's no. So one sort of takeaway from what you said, which and thank you for sharing, and I do hope that two takeaways, right? Number one is everyone's story is different. So just sign up online and go from there. And if you want to be aggressive, be aggressive. Follow up with local contacts. You will find someone like Josh who will find a way for you to get involved. And that's to the second point, which is, you said that you were in the national group, and someone on the ground locally in the chapters was like, oh, well, this guy clearly would get involved. He just, for whatever reason, signed up for the national chapter, not the local one. Well, guess what? That's organizing. Exactly. What that dude did, and for everyone listening, that's really all it is, man. It's, you find, and I have, a background in political organizing as well as grassroots direct action organizing, but particularly on the political level where it's so effective, it's really just the data's out there, right? Who cares about what issues? Unfortunately, too much data is out there, and obviously that's a topic for another time. But even on a superficial level where you're not like reading people's lips on the computer, which, or other shit that Spotify's doing or whatever, right? Like, the information's there. People who want to get involved are part of other organizations. They're part of unions. They're part of a workforce. They're part of a Facebook group, right? They're part of whatever. It's just finding people, right? Maybe they're part of your family. Maybe you have a cousin who is involved in some sort of ancillary, like, social cause, right? Like drug legalization, right? So they know organizers, right? They know how to sort of make a petition with City Hall. Like, it's just finding other people, and it's about channeling them into a particular direction of action, right? Whether it's political or direct.
Okay, so and let me just bring it back to the long-term goal, right? Because at the end of the day, like, we can solve every immediate issue. Be a big miracle if we could solve every immediate issue, even now. But what's the long-term goal? Like, what is the end goal? And it ties in with like the end goal of DSA, whatever, right? It's about returning power to the people. It's about giving the people the power to make the changes that make their lives better going forward. It's not about like we're here right now, but when we're gone, what do we do? Are those tenants going to be left on their own? Well, right now, yeah, they are going to be left on their own. So we want to change that. We want to change how they can fight for themselves, and the end goal for that is to build a tenants union. To bring the people who live there together and form an organization that can continue to fight for the tenants long after the DSA isn't involved. An organization that would survive even the current set of tenants that are there, because a current set of tenants can't fix all their problems and they won't see the benefit of that. But having a tenants union allows tenants to come in and out, and there will always be something in place that's fighting for the tenants as a whole, as like a collective. A lot of the things that happen when you move into an apartment building, and I'll say I'm guilty of it too. I don't know my neighbors, right? I don't know the people who live next door. I don't know anything about them. I know some people across from me have a dog that barks really loud all the time. But yeah, at the end of the day, we're all isolated in our apartments and in our little homes. What a tenants organization does is it just brings people together. And when we're together, we can all notice that, everyone has roach problems. Everybody has hot water problems. Everyone gets their packages stolen. Okay, so now everyone in this room together can say, I will not pay rent. I will not do this until you fix these issues, and you fix them for good.
I think long term, this is it's a war for hearts and minds, like the greats would say, right? It's you're basically, if people are mindful, if people are aware of their collective interest and worth even making noise, but also withholding capital, right? That's what speaks to the landlords. I mean, look, and ideally, at the end of the day, the solution is not even so capital based, right? Maybe it's it's a different system of housing, right? Maybe right. There's some component of guaranteed housing.
Exactly.
But that's long term. That's a different world.
Oh man.
I think.
Sorry to interrupt, but
no, please.
The real long term, I'll say, is to change something. give every human being the right to a roof over their heads. That's like, but that's that's the real long term. As in, like, I don't think I'll see that in my lifetime. But like, I mean, I hope.
Well,
I do.
that's why we focus. Yeah, I mean, that's why we can set things up for that to happen, right? And like you said, a tenants union is medium to long term because it connects people and it gets them thinking and it gets them understanding how common our purpose is, right? We're so isolated, especially now, that we don't understand that our problems are not just our problems. They are shared widely. The wealth gap, the struggle is everywhere.
Right.
It's in the water, man. It's pervasive. People feel it. So going back then to the short term, right? Because let's assume everything we do in the short term is building towards that long term, through that raising awareness. Right. So in the short term, and man, this is a way to, we're gonna do this on every broadcast. This is kind of the point of this whole thing, is what can people do who are listening to help the residents of Ivy Hill, or the residents of a different Ivy Hill. But let's start with this Ivy Hill.
So if you want to help out, right? So let's start if you're in proximity, because there's totally different realms of helping when you're not in proximity and when you are in proximity. If you are in proximity and you're willing to, to dedicate your time and your effort, I would say, come down. We canvass the building every other weekend. Different buildings, and we table outside. And you know what? If you want to give us a hand, shoot the North New Jersey DSA housing group an email that you want to come by. You want to canvass or you want to table. If you're in proximity, come down and stand with us and show the tenants that there are people who will help them. Because another thing is,
what's the best way to hit you up, Josh? Is it our Instagram handle at Organize This?
Yes. Shoot the Instagram handle Organize This a message telling me you want to get involved, and then we'll hook you up with a map with details, times, everything like that. We're there every other weekend on Saturdays, usually from noon to 4, and it would really help to show people that there's a movement behind this. There's people willing to help because they think they're all alone. So we have to show them that we're not alone, right? And the best way to do that, the absolute best way, is to get out there and be there with them, be there for them. And the best way to support other people doing action is to do action. Here's what I'll say. If you live in Utah and you want to support tenants across the country, then go into your apartment building and work to form a tenants association there. Work to build tenant power there, because tenant power across the country is not only an inspiration to people, it's also evidence that it works. Because that's another thing. People don't want to talk because they don't think it works, because they don't think that their words matter. They don't think that their communities can do anything against these ultra powerful landlords and whatever. But we got to show them that they can, and the best way to do that is just by showing them that we have the power.
I really appreciate what you said, Josh, and just to add on a couple of things there. Number one is, you'd be surprised at how effective just talking about a subject with intelligence and sophistication and education can be, right? A lot of these tenants are people who are not highly educated, do not have the time in their lives to get educated about these issues because they're just struggling to raise a family. And yeah, a lot of them are immigrants. They are essentially very much the David to the landlord's Goliath in the truest sense of the word. Just the ability to speak intelligently on an issue on behalf of someone else, right? So even if it's just a matter of someone in a building like this who has been, communicating with their super for months about, an important, like a crack in the wall that breeds mice, right? And the super constantly says, I'll get to it, and never does. Just knock on the super's door and say, hey, I'm a friend of whoever. And by the way, what you're doing is illegal. There's a law that prevents you from doing this. This is something that could be brought to a court. I just want you to know I'm aware of this, and if you don't do something, I will act. And look, obviously that's easier said than done. It's not easy to be confrontational, but the point is, even if it's not something to that extent, don't underestimate your own power when you speak on a subject intelligently. People will take you seriously, and the reason that a lot of people get oppressed is because they don't have the means to even defend their position. So number one, just defend your position. Learn how to defend your position. If that's all you take away from this, that's great. Number two, because you did mention that dreamland, that magic la la land of California, just a couple of comments, and also very practical in terms of what is organizing and what can we do. So Josh, you plugged the North DSA social media network, as you should. And I think, again, very practical tip of organizing is just knowing people, building your network, knowing who the right person is. So know your comrade. So first, cast that wide net. So very practically, I would say DSA LA is one of the most, in my opinion, successful chapters of DSA. Successful, obviously, is whatever. But in terms of pushing political candidates, at least, and pushing political messages, what they've achieved in 2020 alone is astounding. So, follow their page on Instagram, right? Or Twitter, whatever. See what they're talking about. See the other organizers that are tagged in those pages. See the other organization. People's City Council LA, a bunch of LA tenant groups that are on Instagram. Follow those groups, right? Cast a wide net, then know your comrade before you get involved. Figure out, who you're dealing with, what their motivations are, and hopefully we can stuff out more as we go along on our broadcast here. But yeah, just cast a wide net, know people. Back in my day, it was Twitter, 10 or so years ago, as part of the Occupy movement was the way that people, found other people, right? And yes, there were a bunch of FBI agents and a lot of bullshit. And now more than ever, there's, bots and fake accounts. So you got to know your comrade. But as a starting point, cast that wide net, find events, find organizations, go to those events, go in person, see Josh out there canvassing and at the table, meet them, get to know them, go from there. The rest is history.
Exactly. And that's the thing. Organizing, like you said it totally right, is all about connecting people to people, right? And that's what builds power, right? Get exactly like Ilya said. Join your local organization, and it doesn't have to be DSA, right? I will plug DSA, but I know there's Silk City Socialists, there's the IWW, which I'm also a part of, and all these organizations, right? They just want to see a better world. They just have different theories of change, and you don't believe in DSA's theory of change. That's fine, right? Go out there and find that organization that supports your theory of change, or if you feel so passionately about it. Make your own, right? But at the end of the day, get to know everybody. We're all here to work to get these tenants a fair shake, a fair wage in this fight, whatever our theory of change may be. So I say let's all just work together in whatever way is most constructive. Whether that's joining DSA, whether that's joining Silk City Socialist or the IWW and fighting in their ways, or whether it's, joining those organizations and then coming to a DSA event or coming to an IWW event when you're in part of the DSA, right? Solidarity goes beyond the organization you're a part of. It goes beyond the ideology, the specific line of the ideology that you follow. It goes beyond those things because you're a human being and they're human beings. And they're fighting for better rights, and you're fighting for better rights. Whether it be for you or for them, you're in that fight together.
Hell yeah, man! And we'll bring you more stories, more examples, more people-powered movements across the country as time goes on. We'll also, of course, keep you posted on what's going on with Ivy Hill. And feel free to share stuff with us too that we can disseminate. That's part of it too. That's our little small voice, another means of amplification of what's going on.
Tell us about your story or something you know, your friend of yours, a neighbor that experienced some housing problem, some housing injustice. Tell us about it. Knowing that you're not in this fight alone, knowing that these problems are not just your own, that helps. So share your story with us. Share your story with
and knowing what landlords do, what kind of tricks they have up their sleeve that they're all talking about in the country club or their fucking Friday night landlord poker game and jerk off session. That happens, man. These people, they, especially from a legal perspective, right? The law is not a bunch of rules that if you don't follow, you get in trouble.
Right.
No, the law is a bunch of rules that some people have to follow or they don't get in trouble, and some people, frankly, can afford not to follow.
Right.
Right. And beyond that, there's also an actual, means of enforcing law. And, Josh had a great example with these voluntary court hearings for eviction that are going on right now. That has all of the markings of law. And in fact, when you look at its practical impact, that's what it is. People are leaving. People are being evicted. Even though there's a moratorium, the fact that the courts are pushing them out is an example of the law working against them. So that's the law. The law is not the set of rules. It is a constantly influx system of, social mores and societal adaptations based on what's really socially acceptable, which is driven by a narrative that's paid for by the wealthy, as I think is pretty clear.
Which probably includes your landlord.
Which probably includes your landlord. And look, understand that too. Look at, again, look at the LA City Council. Look at who sits on the city council. Look at their jobs. Look at where their assets come from. All of this stuff is, look at the U.S. Congress, right? Look at the Speaker of the House. And it's not, you got to be careful, at least I do, about making things too political because at the end of the day, politicians are just that. They are self-serving. And whether or not their interests align with yours, you cannot put all your eggs in that basket, right? So to affect grassroots change, you need the grassroots.
Exactly.
But in order to just do that, you need to understand, right? You need to understand, where the power lies and how the power is being utilized. So even in that sense, share your story, come out of the closet of the oppressed working class, communicate with others, you are not alone. There's no shame in the struggle. In fact, there's only glory, exactly. I would say, in the better world that you're building.
Exactly. And something else I'll say, just on that political front, it's not about those politicians. Like Ilya said, their changes for you are only temporary. The only political change we need to support is that which puts the power to make future changes into the hands of the people, because that's what we're empowering with grassroots movement. We're not picking politicians who will make some godly change for us that saves us from, that puts us in, saves us from disaster. We're empowering the normal, everyday people to make the changes they need, that they want for themselves in the future after any politician is long gone. And that's the movement. That's the thing that we believe in. That's what we fight for.
Amen. Amen, man. Well, I think that's where, where we might leave you all today. Keep fighting. Power to the people.
This is Organize This, and we are just one voice for organizing. Maybe you could be another.